The office of Sterling and Company, a renowned marketing firm, buzzed with energy as the Monday morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Emma Blake, a 32-year-old marketing manager, sat at her desk overlooking the city skyline. Organized files, a pristine desk, and the faint scent of lavender hinted at her personality, meticulous, ambitious, yet approachable. Emma had spent nearly a decade climbing the corporate ladder, balancing her professional drive with her role as a devoted wife to Ryan, her high school sweetheart. To anyone observing her life from the outside, she had it all: a stable career, a loving husband, and a comfortable home in the suburbs. But beneath the polished surface, cracks were beginning to form. Ryan was a teacher at a local high school, known for his patience and kindness. Their evenings were often quiet, a shared meal, a movie, and early nights. It was a comfortable routine. Yet Emma found herself craving something more. She couldn't put her finger on what was missing. Ryan, content with the life they'd built, seemed oblivious to her growing restlessness. Their conversations had become perfunctory, filled with questions about groceries and weekend plans rather than dreams or desires. Emma sometimes stared at the old photographs on their mantel, young, carefree versions of themselves laughing on a beach, and wondered if those people still existed. The first time Emma noticed Daniel Hart was during the quarterly meeting. He was a recent transfer, introduced as the new vice president of sales, standing tall with sharp features, a confident smile, and an air of authority. Daniel commanded attention effortlessly, unlike the other executives, who often spoke in jargon and numbers. Daniel's voice was magnetic, weaving humor and charisma into his presentation. He spoke directly, locking eyes with various members of the team. But his gaze lingered a second longer on Emma. She told herself it was nothing. After the meeting, Daniel approached her. "Emma, right?" he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, his smile warm. "I've heard great things about your work from the regional office. I hope we'll get a chance to collaborate." "Thank you," Emma replied, her professional demeanor intact, though she couldn't ignore the flutter in her chest. Over the following weeks, Daniel's presence became impossible to ignore. He joined the team's weekly strategy meetings, often sitting across from Emma. Their interactions were professional, yet there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. He'd compliment her ideas during presentations, occasionally adding a sly remark that made her smile despite herself. When she presented a new marketing proposal, Daniel stayed late to discuss it with her. His input was insightful, and Emma couldn't deny she enjoyed their conversations. "Your attention to detail is impressive," he said one evening as they stood by the coffee machine. "It's rare to find someone who blends creativity with strategy so seamlessly." Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot coming from you." At home, Emma began noticing the contrast between her interactions with Daniel and Ryan. While Daniel made her feel seen and valued, Ryan seemed to take her for granted. When she mentioned her new project over dinner, Ryan nodded absent-mindedly, scrolling through his phone. "That's great, Em. You're always good at those things," he said, not looking up. Emma's heart sank. She didn't want accolades, but she longed for engagement. For someone to challenge her and spark the fire she felt was slowly fading. The turning point came during the company's monthly team-building event, held at a chic downtown rooftop bar. Emma rarely drank, but that night, she allowed herself a glass of wine. The city lights twinkled in the background as she laughed with colleagues, momentarily forgetting her inner turmoil. Daniel appeared at her side. "You should do that more often." "Do what?" she asked, tilting her head. "Smile. It suits you." Emma laughed, unsure how to respond. Before she could overthink, Daniel gestured toward the bar. "Come on, let me get you another drink. You've earned it after all the hard work on that campaign." Standing at the bar, their conversation turned personal. Daniel spoke about his move to the city, his love for jazz, and his admiration for driven people like Emma. When their glasses clinked, his eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Emma's stomach flipped, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself in an Uber heading home, replaying the night's events. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Great seeing you tonight. Let's catch up about the campaign tomorrow. It was innocuous, but Emma couldn't ignore the thrill she felt reading it. She told herself it was just work. Just harmless admiration. But deep down, she knew something was beginning to shift. The office hummed with its usual energy the next morning. Emma sat at her desk, trying to focus on her tasks. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the previous night. The text from Daniel lingered in her mind like an unanswered question. When he passed by her desk, he smiled, an ordinary gesture. Yet it sent a ripple through her. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by her office. Emma, he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Can we review the campaign updates together? I think it's important to nail down the direction before next week's presentation. Sure, Emma replied, keeping her tone professional. Inside, her pulse quickened. They moved to the small conference room. The glass walls offered a semblance of transparency. Yet it felt intimate. As they reviewed slides, their conversation became less about the project and more about their lives. You know, Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. It's rare to meet someone who's so dedicated and still human. Most people here are all about numbers, deadlines, and zero personality. Emma laughed softly. I guess I've always believed you can be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the air seemed to thicken. Emma broke the gaze, returning her attention to the screen. The turning point came during another late evening. Most of the office had emptied, the glow of desk lamps casting a soft light on the quiet floor. Emma was finishing up a report when Daniel appeared at her door. You're still here? He asked. His tie loosened and jacket draped over his arm. I could ask you the same. Emma replied with a smile. I thought I'd check on the numbers for next week's projections. But honestly, he hesitated, then smiled. I could use a break. Care to join me for coffee downstairs? Emma hesitated. It's late. Just coffee. No work talk, Daniel said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Against her better judgment, she agreed. They walked to a nearby cafe. Its dim lighting and soft jazz music creating an ambiance that felt strangely private. Over steaming cups of coffee, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Daniel shared stories of his past jobs, his move to the city, and his struggles with work-life balance. What about you? He asked, his voice soft. What keeps you going? Emma thought for a moment. I guess, wanting to prove to myself that I can do it. That I'm more than just ordinary. Daniel's gaze softened. You're far from ordinary, Emma. Her breath caught. She looked away, stirring her coffee to mask the emotions swirling inside her. Over the next few weeks, their interactions grew more frequent. Late-night meetings, casual texts, and chance encounters in the hallway felt increasingly charged. Daniel's compliments became more personal. You look amazing today, he said one morning as she passed him in the corridor. The words were simple, but the way he said them made her heart race. Emma told herself it was harmless. After all, she hadn't crossed any lines. But deep down, she knew her thoughts about Daniel were becoming less professional. At home, Ryan noticed the change. You've been working late a lot recently, he said one evening as they ate dinner. Everything okay? Just a busy season, Emma replied, forcing a smile. She hated lying to him. But the truth felt too complicated to explain. The company held an off-site retreat for its leadership team at a luxurious hotel. Emma and Daniel were among the attendees, along with a dozen other department heads. The first day was filled with workshops and strategy sessions. But the evening brought a lavish dinner. Emma wore a simple yet elegant black dress. And when she entered the room, she felt Daniel's eyes on her. He approached her during the cocktail hour, offering her a glass of wine. You clean up nicely, he teased, his tone light but his gaze intense. And you're surprisingly charming for a VP, Emma replied, trying to match his tone but feeling her cheeks flush. As the evening wore on, the group thinned out, with many heading to their rooms early. Emma and Daniel found themselves sitting in the hotel lounge, talking in hushed tones. The flickering fireplace cast shadows on their faces, and the atmosphere felt electric. At one point, Daniel reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. You deserve to be seen, Emma, Truly seen. The world seemed to pause. Emma's heart pounded as she searched his face for something. Validation? Understanding? She wasn't sure. Their lips met in a hesitant, lingering kiss. Emma woke up the next morning in her hotel room. The events of the night before replaying in her mind. She felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. What had she done? Daniel sent her a text. Last night was unexpected but amazing. Let's talk soon. Her hands trembled as she read it. She wanted to respond but couldn't find the words. Instead, she threw herself into the day's activities, avoiding Daniel as much as possible. By the time the retreat ended, Emma felt as though she was living in two worlds, one where she was the dedicated professional and devoted wife, and another where she was drawn into a dangerous, intoxicating connection. Back at the office, Emma and Daniel agreed to keep things strictly professional, but the tension between them was palpable. Their secret created a bond, yet it also built a wall. Emma knew she was standing on the edge of something destructive but couldn't bring herself to step back. Ryan's concern grew as Emma became more distant. You've been different lately, he said one evening. Is there something you're not telling me? Emma forced a smile. It's just work stress. Nothing to worry about. But she knew it was a lie. And lies, she realized, had a way of unraveling everything. The line Emma swore not to cross was now a faint memory, blurred by weeks of late-night texts, stolen moments, and the intoxicating thrill of secrecy. What started as a kiss in a hotel lounge became a pattern neither she nor Daniel could resist. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting, Daniel lingered outside Emma's office. He waited until the last of their colleagues had left before stepping inside, closing the door behind him. We need to talk, Emma said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Daniel leaned against the edge of her desk, his expression unreadable. Talk or something else, he teased, a sly smile playing on his lips. Emma shook her head, but the pull between them was undeniable. This can't keep happening, Daniel. It's wrong. Then why does it feel so right? He countered, his voice soft but insistent. Before she could reply, he cupped her face, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that left no room for doubt. In that moment, Emma let go of her reservations, giving in to the storm she'd been trying to ignore. Their relationship escalated quickly. They exchanged secretive glances during meetings, coordinated, coincidental, coffee breaks, and found excuses to stay late at the office. Daniel booked discreet hotel rooms for their rendezvous, careful to ensure no one would suspect their growing intimacy. Emma's phone became a lifeline to their secret world. She deleted their messages nightly, but each new text from Daniel set her heart racing. At home, Ryan grew increasingly suspicious. Emma's late nights, distracted demeanor, and guarded phone habits didn't escape his notice. One evening, Ryan confronted her as she packed her bag for yet another work event. Is there something going on, Emma? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Emma froze, her hand hovering over her bag. What do you mean? You've been distant, secretive. This isn't like you. Emma forced a laugh. It's just work, Ryan. You know how demanding my job can be. But as she walked out the door, guilt gnawed at her. She wanted to stop, to go back to the way things were. But every time she thought about ending things with Daniel, the idea felt unbearable. Gossip began to swirl in the office. Megan Lane, a junior marketing associate with a reputation for nosiness, started noticing the patterns. The way Daniel always seemed to find reasons to be near Emma. The occasional hand on her shoulder. The shared smiles. It didn't take long for Megan to piece together the truth. One afternoon, as Emma returned to her desk, she found Megan waiting for her. Can I help you with something, Megan? Emma asked, trying to keep her tone light. Megan smiled, her expression just shy of smug. Oh, nothing. Just noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Daniel lately. Must be nice to have the VP's attention. Emma's stomach twisted. We work closely on a lot of projects. It's part of my job. Of course, Megan said, her tone dripping with feigned innocence. Just be careful. People talk. As Megan walked away, Emma realized how precarious her situation had become. She and Daniel weren't as invisible as they'd thought. The first real crisis came one rainy Friday night. Emma and Daniel were working late, reviewing a campaign proposal. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on Emma. Do you ever think about what this would be like, if it weren't a secret? Emma hesitated. What do you mean? I mean, us. Out in the open. No hiding. No pretending. The thought terrified her. Daniel, I can't. I have a husband. A life. This isn't supposed to be more than what it is. Daniel's expression darkened. So that's all I am to you? A fling? Emma stood, her voice sharp. You knew what this was from the beginning. Don't act like you didn't. The tension was unbearable, but before either could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emma's heart stopped. She quickly gathered her things and left, her mind racing with the realization of how close they'd come to being discovered. Back at home, Ryan waited for Emma, his arms crossed as she walked through the door. Working late again? He asked, his tone cold. Emma nodded. Big campaign coming up. Ryan's eyes narrowed. I found this, he said, holding up a small hotel keycard. Care to explain? Emma's blood ran cold. She'd forgotten to dispose of it after her last meeting with Daniel. She fumbled for an excuse. It's from the retreat. I must have left it in my bag. Ryan's silence was deafening. You're sure about that? Of course, Emma said, forcing a laugh. What else would it be? But as she walked away, she knew the walls of her double life were beginning to close in. At work, Daniel became increasingly frustrated with Emma's hesitations. How long are we going to keep pretending this isn't real? He asked one evening. Emma's voice trembled as she replied. It can't be real, Daniel. It's not supposed to be. But even as she said the words, a part of her didn't believe them. She was caught in a web of her own making, unable to see a way out without destroying everything she'd worked so hard to build. The office had an energy Emma couldn't ignore. Hushed conversations, stolen glances, and muffled laughter seemed to follow her everywhere. Megan Lane, the self-appointed detective of the office, had been dropping cryptic hints to anyone who would listen. Emma overheard snippets in the break room. Have you noticed how close Daniel and Emma are? I mean, they're always working late together. Weird, right? Emma's chest tightened. She glanced at Daniel during a team meeting. His expression remained calm, but she saw the flicker of tension in his jaw. Their secret was slipping through their fingers, and neither of them knew how to stop it. One night, Emma arrived home later than usual. Ryan was waiting in the living room, his face shadowed by the dim light of the television. We need to talk, he said, his voice low but firm. Emma froze. What's this about? Ryan held up her phone. I saw your messages. Emma, I know. Her heart dropped. She had been careful, deleting messages, using vague language, but she must have slipped up. Ryan, I can explain. Don't. He interrupted. I don't want excuses. I want the truth. Are you having an affair? Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she struggled to find the words. It's not what you think, she whispered. Ryan's voice cracked. Then tell me what it is. But Emma couldn't answer. The silence between them was louder than any confession. At the office, Daniel grew impatient. The tension was affecting his work, and his frustration with Emma was palpable. Emma, we need to figure this out, he said one evening, cornering her in the stairwell. This hiding, the sneaking around, it's killing me. What do you want me to say? Daniel? Emma replied, her voice strained. I can't just blow up my life. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. Then what are we doing? You can't keep running back and forth. Either you're in this with me, or you're not. Emma looked away, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know. Daniel's face hardened. You need to decide, Emma, because I can't keep doing this. The breaking point came during the quarterly company town hall. Emma was presenting the team's latest campaign, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She could feel Daniel's eyes on her from across the room, and it took all her focus to stay composed. As she finished, Megan Lane raised her hand. Great presentation, Emma, she said, her tone saccharine. I was just wondering, how do you find time to work on all this and manage such close collaborations with certain team members? The room fell silent. Emma's face burned as she stared at Megan. whose smirk was unmistakable. After the meeting, Emma stormed into Daniel's office. "Megan knows," she hissed. "She's trying to expose us." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Let her," he said. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending." Emma stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling inside her. "Do you even care what happens to me?" "Of course I care," Daniel replied, standing and stepping closer. "But I'm tired of living in the shadows. Aren't you?" The rumors reached HR within days. Linda Carter, the firm's no-nonsense HR manager and one of Emma's closest friends, called her into her office. "Emma, I hate to do this, but I have to ask, are the rumors true?" Linda's voice was gentle but firm. Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Linda sighed. "You know I have to report this to senior management. This could cost you your job." "Emma, I understand," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "But please, don't let this affect the team." As Emma left Linda's office, she felt the weight of her choices crashing down on her. She had jeopardized everything, her career, her reputation, her marriage, for a man she wasn't even sure she could trust. That evening, Ryan was waiting again. This time, he had packed a bag. "I can't do this anymore, Emma," he said, his voice shaking. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" "Ryan, please," Emma begged, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake. I can fix this. We can fix this." Ryan shook his head. "You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, and now I'm making mine." He walked out the door, leaving Emma alone in the quiet, empty house. Desperate for comfort, Emma called Daniel. He met her at a bar, his demeanor uncharacteristically cold. "I don't know what to do," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I've lost Ryan. I might lose my job. I need you." Daniel took a sip of his drink, his expression detached. "Emma, maybe this is for the best. Sometimes things fall apart so we can move forward." Emma stared at him, realization dawning. "You don't care about me, do you? You just wanted this." Daniel shrugged. "I cared, Emma, but I didn't sign up for a lifetime of drama." Emma left the bar, her heart shattered. The man she had risked everything for had turned out to be nothing more than a selfish opportunist. The house was eerily quiet, the absence of Ryan's presence a void that Emma could physically feel. She sat on the living room couch, surrounded by scattered remnants of her life, Ryan's forgotten sweater draped over a chair, their wedding photo still perched on the mantel, and her phone glowing with unread messages. The messages were from colleagues, friends, and even Linda. Emma ignored them all. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to sit with her emotions, guilt, shame, anger, and heartbreak, swirling together in a storm that left her feeling hollow. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office early, hoping to avoid the whispers and judgmental glances. But the weight of her choices was unavoidable. Linda called her into her office again, her expression grim. "Emma, the senior leadership team has decided to issue a formal warning. Your position is safe for now, but any further incidents will result in termination." Emma nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for giving me another chance." Linda's eyes softened. "Emma, you're one of the most talented people here. Don't let this mistake define you. Learn from it." As Emma returned to her desk, she felt a flicker of determination. Her career was one of the few things she still had, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Later that week, Emma attended a charity gala hosted by Sterling & Co. Despite her reluctance, she knew it was important to show up, to prove she was still a professional, even if she didn't feel like one. The event was lavish, filled with music, laughter, and clinking glasses. Emma sipped her champagne and stayed on the periphery, avoiding meaningful conversations. As she watched the crowd, she spotted Daniel across the room, surrounded by colleagues, his charm on full display. He caught her gaze and gave her a small nod. But it wasn't the warm, intimate gesture it once was. It was distant, impersonal, a reminder of how far they had fallen. Emma turned away. For the first time, she saw Daniel not as the magnetic, confident man she had been drawn to, but as someone selfish and flawed, a reflection of her own vulnerabilities. The realization hit her like a cold wind. Daniel hadn't ruined her life. She had made those choices herself. That night, Emma sat at her kitchen table, a blank piece of paper in front of her. She had tried texting and calling Ryan, but he hadn't responded, so she decided to write him a letter. Dear Ryan, I don't know if you'll read this, but I hope you will. I owe you an apology. Not just for what I did, but for how I failed to be honest with you, and with myself. I didn't stray because of anything you did or didn't do. I strayed because I was running from my own unhappiness. And I didn't have the courage to confront it. You deserved better. I wish I could undo the pain I caused. But all I can do now is take responsibility and promise to do better. For myself and for anyone I love in the future. You are a good man, Ryan, and I'll always be grateful for the years we had together. I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. Even if we can't go back to what we were. Love, Emma. She folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. Unsure if she'd ever have the courage to send it. Emma started therapy the following week. Her therapist, Dr. Fields, was a calm, reassuring presence who helped her untangle the emotions she had buried for so long. It's not just about what happened with Daniel, Emma admitted during one session. It's about why I let myself get to that point. Why I didn't see the signs earlier. Dr. Fields nodded. Healing starts with understanding. You're here, and that's the first step. Emma also threw herself into self-care. She joined a yoga class, reconnected with old friends, and even started journaling, a practice she hadn't done since college. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. One evening, Emma received a text from Linda. Join me for coffee tomorrow? I think you'll want to hear this. Curious, Emma agreed. At the cafe, Linda wasted no time getting to the point. Daniel's resigning, she said. Emma's eyes widened. Why? Linda smirked. Let's just say you weren't the only one he got close to. HR received complaints from 2 other employees. Turns out his charm wasn't as harmless as he liked to pretend. Emma's emotions were a mix of shock and relief. For so long, she had seen Daniel as the catalyst for her downfall. Now, she saw him for what he truly was. A man who thrived on manipulation and control. Weeks turned into months, and Emma slowly began to rebuild her life. She and Ryan met for coffee one afternoon at his suggestion. He looked healthier, happier, his new routine clearly suiting him. Thank you for the letter, Ryan said, breaking the awkward silence. It helped. Emma smiled, her heart heavy but hopeful. I meant every word. They talked for over an hour. Not about reconciliation but about closure. By the end of their conversation, Emma felt a weight lift. She knew they were on separate paths now. But there was peace in their parting. Emma walked into the office with a renewed sense of determination. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions. But she was no longer the same person who had let herself spiral into chaos. Her priorities were clearer now, her career, her personal growth, and reclaiming her sense of self-worth. The first step was rebuilding her reputation at work. Emma volunteered for a high-profile campaign that had been struggling under another team's leadership. She poured her energy into the project, working closely with colleagues to ensure its success. It was her chance to show everyone, including herself, that she could rise above the mistakes of her past. When the campaign launched and exceeded expectations, the praise she received wasn't just for the results, it was for her leadership and resilience. For the first time in months, Emma felt proud of herself. Despite her progress, the remnants of her relationship with Daniel lingered. His resignation had left a void in the office, but also whispers about his departure. Some colleagues expressed relief, while others speculated about the circumstances. Emma chose to stay silent, letting the situation speak for itself. One afternoon, she came across a folder of old emails from Daniel while cleaning out her desk. For a moment, she considered reading them, letting herself relive the whirlwind of emotions they once carried. But instead, she deleted the entire folder. Goodbye, Daniel, she whispered, feeling the weight lift as she clicked the button. Emma's journey of self-discovery inspired her to help others avoid the same mistakes. She started a blog under a pseudonym, writing candidly about navigating professional and personal challenges, the importance of setting boundaries, and learning from failures. Her posts quickly gained traction. Readers resonated with her honesty and vulnerability, and many reached out to share their own stories. Emma found a sense of purpose in connecting with others, turning her mistakes into lessons that could help others grow. Months later, while walking through the park on a crisp fall afternoon, Emma saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench. Ryan. He was reading a book, his face calm and content. For a moment, Emma hesitated. Should she approach him? Would he even want to talk to her? As if sensing her presence, Ryan looked up and smiled. It wasn't the strained smile of their last meeting, it was warm. Genuine. Emma, he said, closing his book. Fancy seeing you here. They chatted for a while, catching up on each other's lives. Ryan mentioned he'd been seeing someone, a kind-hearted woman he'd met through a mutual friend. Emma felt a pang of sadness but also genuine happiness for him. As they parted ways, Ryan said, "You look good." Emma, happier. "I'm glad. Thank you," Emma replied, her voice steady. "I'm glad for you too." For the first time, Emma felt closure, not just with Ryan, but with that chapter of her life. Emma's professional life continued to thrive. Sterling and Company recognized her hard work by promoting her to senior marketing manager, a role that came with greater responsibilities and opportunities to mentor younger colleagues. She took the position seriously, using her experiences to guide others in navigating the complexities of work-life balance. One of her mentees, a young associate named Clara, confided in Emma about feeling overwhelmed by office politics and personal pressures. "Don't lose yourself in trying to please everyone," Emma advised. "Set boundaries, know your worth, and never be afraid to ask for help. I learned that the hard way." Clara smiled. "Thank you, Emma. I needed to hear that." Emma's life began to feel whole again, not because everything was perfect, but because she had learned to embrace imperfection. She continued therapy, maintained her friendships, and even explored new hobbies like photography and hiking. One weekend, she joined a local hiking group, where she met Alex, an architect with a dry sense of humor and a passion for the outdoors. Their connection was slow and steady, built on shared interests and mutual respect. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt the possibility of love without the weight of expectation. One evening, Emma sat on her balcony, overlooking the city lights. She opened her laptop and typed the final entry for her blog. "We all make mistakes, some bigger than others, but our mistakes don't define us. How we choose to rise after them does. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, and I'm grateful for that. Life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes painful, but it's also full of second chances. Here's to taking them." She hit publish and closed her laptop, a sense of peace washing over her. The past would always be a part of her story, but it no longer held her captive. She was ready to embrace whatever came next. A year later, Emma stood in front of a conference room filled with young professionals at a leadership workshop. She had been invited to speak about resilience and overcoming challenges. "My journey hasn't been easy," she said, her voice steady, "but every failure taught me something valuable. Life isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about learning from them and using those lessons to grow." The applause at the end of her talk was heartfelt. But what meant the most to Emma were the conversations afterward. Attendees thanked her for her honesty, sharing their own struggles and finding comfort in her story. As Emma left the building, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the city in a warm glow. She smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in years.